All right, guys. I would like to welcome Robin Steenman, the individual that launched, and maybe speaking at it, it has launched and sustained the Moms for Liberty movement in Tennessee. Her chapter here in Williamson County is a shining example of what can happen when you active, involved, caring mothers get involved. They've had tremendous impact. Not only is their chapter had a tremendous impact at the local level, they've worked on state issues, and then they've launched other chapters, and the movement is growing nationally. Robin's got a lot on her plate. She's got a 1-year-old, and she's having to do everything that moms do, and then she's having to do all of this stuff too, and it's very challenging. I know my wife just gets the business. She has to take care of everything at the house and then do all this kind of stuff. And we really appreciate the ladies to get involved and have a heart for the kids and politics. We got to get in culture from our families to stay on track where they need to be in the state of Tennessee. So if you would give a warm welcome to Robin Steenman.
A 1, 5, and 7-year-old. So full time. Alex Abernathy talked about how he loved to follow politicians because he can be the shining beacon of public speaking. Well, what about the poor soul that gets to follow Alex Abernathy? Being that I'm just a mom, right? But here we go. I am an ex-military. I'm a former B-1 pilot. I left the service. I left the Air Force in order to start a family. That was going to be my priority in my next mission in life. Yet here I am as this ever-evolving one. I'd like to talk to you today about the sacred fire. On the afternoon of April 30th, 1789, following 8 bloody years, 1775 to 1783, of fighting for liberty in the Revolutionary War, George Washington took the first presidential oath of office on the balcony of the 2nd floor of Federal Hall, located at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets in New York City. It was then serving as the House of Representatives on the bottom floor and the Senate on the top, on the second rather. That morning had been filled with clanging church bells and prayers. As Washington strode out onto the balcony, a cheer went up from the throngs of Americans squeezed onto Wall and Broad Street and occupying every rooftop in sight. A Bible lay on a red velvet draped table. It was a late addition decided on that morning by a congressional committee that the president should lay his hand on the Bible while taking the oath of office. New York Chancellor Robert Livingston administered the oath of office. And as he completed the oath, George Washington, who was visibly moved, leaned forward, grasped the Bible, and brought it to his lips. Legend has it that he added the words, "So help me God." His voice was soft and breathy, and that's why it's legend. But those words are now attached to all the American oaths of office, including, I can attest, military enlistments and officerships to add, "So help me God." When Livingston announced to the crowd, "It is done," the Americans in foreign territory without a monarch chanted, "Long live George Washington," reminiscent of "Long live the King." We had a lot to learn. Washington then walked through the balcony doors to enter the Senate chamber for his inaugural address. As he began his speech, he seemed flustered. I can relate. And he thrust his left hand into his pocket while turning the pages with a trembling right hand. I can relate to that too. The senators had to lean forward to discern his deep voice. As in case you didn't know, he had a lot of dental problems, which made his voice kind of low and soft and breathy. Said Senator William McClay of Pennsylvania, sometimes a harsh critic of Washington's, "This great man was agitated and embarrassed more than ever he was by leveled cannon or pointed musket. He trembled and several times could scarce make out to read, though it must be supposed he had read it often before." In the first line of his inaugural address, Washington expressed anxiety about his fitness for presidency, saying that, quote, No event could have filled me with greater anxieties. He considered his own, quote, inferior endowments from nature and his lack of experience in civil government. He drew comfort, however, from the fact that the, quote, almighty being had overseen the birth of the nation. Stating that no people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than the people of the United States. On page 6, he wrote, "The sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government are justly considered as deeply, perhaps as finally staked, on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people." When I quote this line in public spaces, I often drop out the middle for the sake of brevity and just that it would flow a little bit better, but I think today the middle part bears repeating. Certainly, Washington himself thought it was important enough to underline. Preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government are justly considered as deeply, perhaps as finally, staked on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people. Without knowing the course the world would take, he knew that if the sacred fire of liberty were snuffed out here, then it would be snuffed out for the world. And that's absolutely true today. How do we know that? Should we lose our Republican model of government here? Can you name me one bastion of liberty to where you would apply for refuge? The sacred fire is in our hands. It's in our hands. Without having met you, I know that every person in this room is a flame holder or a torch bearer. We all sense that the sacred fire is down to a burning ember these days. The Biden administration seeks to snuff it out. The Republican establishment fails to stand in their way. But who is the sacred fire trusted to in the first place? We the people. The American people. Quote, the American people. We safeguard the sacred fire. We fast forward to another inauguration on January 20th of 2021. I was driving my daughter to kindergarten in the morning in a horrible mood as I listened to President Trump board Air Force One and all those proceedings as he left Washington, D.C. And by the time I had dropped her off and I was driving home, Air Force One was wheels up, and the Biden administration's first act was to promptly delete the 1776 commission from the White House website. Why? The first act, the first one, that's the truth, is that threatening? A true depiction of history, is that threatening? That's the first thing when Air Force One is in the air with Trump. To cancel an effort to teach Americans about our history, local hero Dr. Carol Swain was part of that commission, which was led by an incredible array of leaders and thinkers from the Black community. I don't think they were trying to whitewash history. And my daughter is now in the 2nd grade and learning about the first colony of Jamestown, Virginia. Did you know that when the first colonists landed in Virginia in 1607 and planted a wooden cross in the sand, Pastor Robert Hunt, the chaplain of Jamestown, knelt upon the cross and offered a prayer of dedication. We do hereby dedicate this land and ourselves to reach the people within these shores with the gospel of Jesus Christ and to raise up godly generations after us. And with these generations, take the kingdom of God to all the earth. May this covenant of dedication remain to all generations as long as this earth remains. Fast forward to 1789. When our first president brought the Bible to his lips and asked for God's help in the dispatch of his office. And that is the actual Bible. Fast forward, when you are more likely to find pornographic materials in school libraries than you go to the Bible. I cannot read you excerpts from those books. It is pornographic. Our country was founded on the Bible. We are a Christian nation. It was the most referred to source document for the Declaration of Independence, the document that changed the world, that was responsible for the 5,000-year leap, that espoused a landmark concept that all men are created equal and have certain inalienable rights, which we have taken absolutely for granted for the 246 years following. Except for the government, which is, by the way, now the largest employer in the world. That's again, with about 87,000 new employees about to come on. When they start to encroach on those rights, we the people who are entrusted the sacred fire of liberty are waking up, and we better wake the others, lest we become an Australia, New Zealand, Sri Lanka, or God forbid, as Venezuela. In February 2021, I became aware that Williamson County Schools hired a diversity, equity, inclusion consultancy. Even though I had removed my child from that environment due to masking and draconian COVID policy, I took note as a citizen of what the schools were doing. The 1776 Commission was formed to counteract the rot of the 1619 Project, which is the bedrock for critical race theory, which seeks to do nothing more than divide our country along racial lines into warring tribes, tribalism. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is that CRT in praxis, is the policy. It's a policy that we see implemented in corporations and institutions and higher education across our country, and it rots whatever it affects, with none other than racism and Marxist ideology. So if our schools marinate our children in DEI, and they take it home to 40,000 families across Williamson County, then what can it be expected to do? It rots the family, and thereby it rots the county, and so on. And by steeping the children in this ideology, are you enriching their lives or equipping them for success or encouraging them to reach for the stars? No, you're doing psychological harm, which may not be fixable. I can buy DEI trainings at Coca-Cola and Lockheed Martin, and locally, Nissan, Mars Pet Care, our local Chamber of Commerce, because those organizations are comprised of critically thinking adults that should be able to filter it out. And those adults are capable of standing up in the room saying, you know, this is false. As a former military person, how disappointing that those retired general officers, the supposed war horses of the Constitution, and now working for defense contractors, don't stand up and say so. This is un-American and it's racist, but I digress. But I can't abide when they start doing this to kids, because kids are defenseless. Their teacher, especially in elementary, can do no wrong and say no wrong. Their teacher is on a pedestal, one that often rivals parents. And when teachers start shaming children based on their skin color, whether they're oppressed or oppressor, both result in shame. Little ones are being harmed, and that's when I stand up. Luke 17:2, it would be better for him to have a millstone hung around his neck and to be thrown into the sea than to cause one of these little ones to stumble. And so I started the Williamson County chapter of Moms for Liberty. I was aware of a letter to our superintendent addressing the racialization and emotional harm that had befallen a second grade biracial boy. Within 2 weeks of founding the chapter, parents of that child arranged a meeting and shared their experience. We all know the marks of CRT by now. That child, that 7-year-old, was ashamed of his white half, his white father, his white grandparents. He didn't want to be an American. He only wanted to be Thai. What did that to him in Williamson County Schools? With the DEI policy hovering at the door, we quickly realized the CRT in some form was already inside the building. So we started with the second grade curriculum that was cited in the parents' letter and found it a horrifying cocktail of critical race theory for 7 and 8-year-olds with no historical perspective or ability to sift through the toxic message, even teaching them about the N-word. What second grader needs to learn about the N-word in second grade English language arts? Mind you, this is English language arts, and it spends more time looking at history through a lens of critical social justice than teaching the kids to read and write. But for the left agenda, that's the whole point. According to Abraham Lincoln, 14th president, the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next. That is the whole point. That's your $100, and that's why we have the problems we have today. They don't want critical thinkers who can write well enough to convey a thought or an idea or make a point or even engage in debate. They want emotional beings whose decisions are fueled by emotion. Senator Bowling talked about that already. Emotion, when you are just guided by emotion, that trumps reason, that trumps logic, that trumps fact, that trumps your faith. Emotion, emotion, emotion. The left loves it because it's subjective. The left does not believe in objective truth, just the subjective truth of their emotions. And that is what they are raising your kids to do. So who controls your kids and who controls the emotional stimuli? And that is the essence of social emotional learning. As we saw the incredible slant for the second grade civil rights module, which is a topic normally reserved for middle school, by the way, civil war. They're teaching these second graders, and that's by design. But as we saw how horrible that particular module 3 in second grade, a coalition of 30 parents came together and invested 1,200 hours in 6 weeks to cover all the books in the Wit Wisdom curriculum. That's the name of the curriculum, by the way. It's been in the news. And their book reports that these individual parents did are still there on our website. You can download them and view them. The thing that it gave us was the bird's eye view of the whole thing. So a parent of a kindergartner who sees one particular book called Why Mosquitoes Buzz in People's Ears and says, oh, this is awfully dark. Like all the animals look mad with fangs out and gnashing teeth, and they're talking about murder and depression for my kindergartner. But it's just one book, and maybe it's just all in my head, and maybe I'm the only one that thinks this is odd. So I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. But you step back and you see a whole curriculum. Well, you'll find common threads that weave through it. K through 5, at the top, mean white people. That's in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 5th grade. Cannibalism, 1st, 3rd, and 4th grade. By the way, we were shocked that cannibalism was a common thread in an English language arts elementary curriculum. That surprised us. But if you've seen in the media over the past year, cannibalism is coming more and more to surface as part of an agenda. Suicide ideation, that's 1st, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades. Extreme emotion. Remember what I said, emotion, emotion, emotion. That's all grades. Anti-family, 1st, 4th, and 5th grade. Continuing, there is dark, graphic, negative imagery in all grades. Age inappropriate topics in all grades. Anti-Americanism and graphic death in all grades. And when I say age inappropriate topics, what might I be referring to? In kindergarten, murder and critical social justice. That needs to be added onto the slide. In the 1st grade, you've got graphic mating and gender fluidity. In the 2nd grade, on top of all the critical race theory, you've got anti-police, anti-fire department sentiments. In the 3rd grade, heavily anti-church and torture. 4th grade, rape, murder, adultery, scalping and skinning. And the 5th grade, gore, graphic violence, alcoholism, promiscuity. And since I started talking about George Washington, I thought I would show you how Wit Wisdom portrays George Washington to our 4th graders. You can do Google searches, image searches for George Washington, and they're all very placid, sometimes taciturn demeanor. He's always very seriously composed. I've never seen, the first time I ever saw a depiction of an angry George Washington was on the cover of this book, George versus George. I can't read that from here, but this whole book, it talks about soldiers forcing women and infants out of the street, killing them and burning their houses down. You can see the imagery that goes along with that. And the highlighted text, because I'm focusing on how it depicts George Washington, it says George Washington sent his troops to burn down innocent Indian villages. And that the Continental Army scalped them and skinned them and showed off skin leggings made from the hides of Indians, and that is why to this day George Washington is still called Town Destroyer. I haven't heard that story. I've actually been doing some deep dive into George Washington. That's not accurate either. But that is how our 4th graders, their initial foray into George Washington. And one other example. We have taken a lot of flack for seahorses. There have been memes made up about Moms for Liberty and our aversion to seahorses. But when you introduce it in a certain way in the 1st grade, there's an agenda. All of it is deliberate. All of it has an agenda. There really is nothing wrong with it. But parents open up this book about seahorses and they see, oh, seahorse sexual positions. For children that have no idea what sex is. And then it talks about bending, squeezing, dancing, you know, how they twirl around each other. And then it emphasizes the male seahorse getting pregnant and having the babies. And it just goes, and in teacher's manuals, emphasize, emphasize, emphasize. And then they add a video to it that says, oh, well, in the ocean, identity is a fluid and mysterious thing. You're planting seeds. I mean, on the faith side of things, faith the size of a mustard seed can tell that mountain to get up and throw itself into the ocean. But you can plant seeds in a child's mind that will take root and sprout many years down the road. And we wonder why there's a 4,000% increase in gender dysphoria among teenage girls. These seeds are planted 6 and 7 years olds. And, you know, the parents are told, you're crazy. It's seahorses. Get over it. But then look at this movie that was made in 2015. And oh, by the way, we all have the pregnant man emotional items. So, the results of that deep dive, we put on a community event. It's called Let's Talk Wit Wisdom. You can still go to our website. That video, which is me talking for 90 minutes in a dark room. I mean, you can see I might have the best public speaker. I might not be the most interesting or engaging. 90 minutes of me just talking about curriculum has had over 10,000 views. Crazy. I never expected that. But go to our website and check it out, because we unveiled a whole curriculum. And we've even found things since then, and we'll get into that with a follow-on speaker that's going to be a nice surprise for you guys. So, marry all of that with the fact that this curriculum, did you know, was illegally and corruptly adopted at the state level by none other than our local Commissioner of Education, Penny Schwinn. That curriculum failed state review twice. It did not meet state standards. Its failing grades were the worst of any curriculum available to pick from. And yet she pushed it, waived it in 33 counties. She overreached her waiver ability so egregiously that the legislature stripped her of her waiver rights the following session. We thought for sure that if we shine a light on this to our school board, that the curriculum was harming children, never passed state standards. that for surely, regardless of your political leanings, you're going to get behind the fact that our children deserve a curriculum that does no harm and effectively teaches them to read and write. But our school administration and our school board dug in. Our county commission didn't do anything about it either. We were the first to exercise the newly minted anti-CRT law and filed a complaint on June 30th of 2021. 5 months later, Penny Schwinn dismissed our complaint on technicality. Come to find out, Blount County also filed a complaint, only to have it rejected, revealing the true colors of our Department of Education and a law that is unenforceable and needs to be fixed. I met with Governor Bill Lee, by the way, and I met with Penny Schwinn. He told me Wit Wisdom is my problem. Wit Wisdom is your problem. And I replied, it wouldn't be my problem if the law had been followed. Then he told me Penny Schwinn was a staunch conservative. I said, Berkeley, Dianne Feinstein, left Catholic starship. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. So there's two paths from here. One, you keep waking the parents, and that's what Moms for Liberty seeks to do. That video is not going to play, which is good because we're out of time anyway. But we have a lot planned for this coming year, a lot. And parents, you know, Syracuse is not the only thing. And we have well-educated parents in Williamson County on what critical race theory is and what it does, and that DEI is critical race theory. Our parents are all pretty well taught through those subjects now, but you start saying SEL, social emotional learning, and then they start to get that far off look. And then you say CSE, comprehensive sex education, and they're like, and then you say, oh, but restorative justice, and then they just want to hide their heads. And I'm not even done yet. What about the trans agenda? Gender ideology in our schools. Do you realize that that is just pouring acid on a child's mind and their body? There are so many battlefronts in the war for our children, it'll make your head spin. I know because my head has been spinning myself. So Moms for Liberty in the coming months, we are presenting one battlefront a month. In October, we'll have a keynote speaker from Dr. James Lindsay for social emotional learning. Beyond that, we'll have a month about the trans agenda. We're going to bring in experts in the field to help parents get a grasp of these issues so they can advocate for their children and they can be wise to the stuff in schools. And if there's any doubt as to who we are, that's just some of that. So the other way than waiting the parents, how else do you make change when your elected officials won't listen? Well, you change who's listening. And you do that at the ballot box. So in order to effectively do that, I had to step outside of the Moms for Liberty bubble, and I started a PAC called Williamson Families, of, by, and for the families. We kicked off in November of 2021 with John Rich, Clay Travis, Lee Allen Baker, and the Starbucks. From there, we vetted approximately 24 candidates, and I'm a metrics person because I'm ex-military. We put in over 1,000 hours of vetting these people, just to make sure we knew their heart and mind, and if they were a true conservative or not. No rhinos need not apply. So we ultimately endorsed 19, 6 for school board and 13 for our county commission. We only want torchbearers. Some of them had to run as independents. That's another story. But how do we do? That's not going to play either, but 9 out of 19 won and $130,000 raised. And in that number, there are some wonderful victories. I mean, true torchbearers for liberty on the county commission and school board for Williamson County. There's also some tough losses in there because those candidates became, Williamson Families is like a family. And any loss is hard to take. And in that number are many late nights and sacrifices, high points and low points, and what am I doing this moment? We all got an email from Brandon recently where he's talking about his why am I doing this moment. We all go through the shadow. We all go through those peaks and valleys. Some exceptional candidates didn't win. One at least is sitting in this room. Lots of great legislation has been killed. You suffered setbacks, and this fight can be thankless. Returning to our venerable first president, did you know that Washington lost his first election? He was running for the Virginia House of Burgesses. He lost by a lot. But his loss was the first step on the road to becoming the father of our country. Did you know that he lost more battles in the Revolutionary War than he won? And some of those defeats were so devastating that his correspondence reveals that he questioned continuing as commander-in-chief. That's a picture of Valley Forge. We've all heard the horror stories of the sufferings of Valley Forge and the dark times that the soldiers and Washington himself endured, and they came through it. The British were the preeminent force in the military in the world. I have a bunch of extraneous Washington slides here that you can take out. And they thought Washington was done when he retreated across the Delaware River in 1776. But we are Americans, and we will literally come back and waste you on Christmas Day. The point being, he lost many battles, but he won the war. He lost his first election, but was the only president to be unanimously voted on by Congress. So don't give up. Never give in. Never, 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 never. And nothing great or small, large or petty, never give in except to convictions of honor and good sense. Never yield to force. Never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. Winston Churchill. That is up to us. If you're going to be a torchbearer or a flame holder for liberty, it's not going to be easy. It's only going to get harder before it gets easier. So I stand with all of you, and I will never give up. And to close with one final line of Washington's first inaugural speech. No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men than those of the United States. Every step by which they have advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token of providential agency. We need to remember our founding, remember our roots, and remember God as we go forward. Bless that be the outcome. I want to thank you for your time today. We are on social media, and also we created our own website that's separate from Nationals so that we could provide a resource for all of these critical battlefronts. It's under construction, but when you go there, you'll see a page, the resource library, and it's going to have, and it does have CSE, SEL, CRT, Transagenda, Restorative Justice, all of the things, and it will be a resource to you, and those pages will be built as we focus on a battlefront each month. And I hope you'll visit us.